Okay, it's about, in fact, changes in architectural practice for the Adaptable City project. So Chris explained to us very well this kind of need, but I think we have to see how architectural practice changes, in fact. And it's interesting to see that it's a shift that started back in the 60s and the 70s, and we see a person that we all know, Cedric Price, and his collaboration with Interaction Collective. And in fact, it was interesting to see that it was a moment of changes in the society, that architecture practice actually was encouraged to change, and we see mass consumerism, mass housing, and mass media. And in fact, Price was invited not only to do this project, but to draw for supporting the fundraising of the project. So we see that architects don't only do drawings for projects and objects, but they do drawings for fundraising. Of course, at that moment, Price initiated this kind of negotiating capacities for architecture, and there was this design process that was opening up to collective platforms, and how this actually structure was inviting for participation. But at the same time, there was a failure, because what he gave to this collective was of high-tech character, and they provided low-tech kind of man-dev, and they ended up in courts. So there's always this kind of tension and conflict that everybody has to have in mind. This is an excerpt from the winning team in Stavanger called Forus Labing. The task at hand involves working in different scales and with a diverse set of mechanisms, blending urban planning, programming, operative and recreation landscapes, infrastructure, and communication. This is written for, in fact, the practice of Europan, of these kind of young practitioners, which, as you see, it's a really vast demand of expectations from our kind of colleagues. I think the challenge of the Adaptable City project is to take these projects of Europan and make them negotiation apparatus, like means with which we can negotiate, and how the urban actors in the city can actually use that. And in fact, I think there are multiple tensions within kind of this process. How this negotiation apparatus, in fact, could foster the presence of the public domain when we all know that there's a decreasing of the welfare state, and to promote sharing that Chris was sharing before, but we all know that we live in an increasingly segregated world. And of course, we also understand and we sense that the urban environments are in condition of transition all the time, and that they are uncertain and unpredictable. So all these kind of challenging, I would say, issues. And of course, there's a competition side, which there's another set of tensions that they arise between the actors that they are, in fact, on site, they have their own agendas, and then there are the incoming urban actors that they have their own agendas, and they relate to new dynamics. And in fact, the Europan project, as a negotiation kind of vehicle, is invited to navigate through all these kind of tensions. And I think that's a really challenge and a difficulty at the same time. And in fact, we're looking to see for these kind of new shared hybrid territories. And I think Chris gave an introduction to that by talking about, in fact, how these kind of urban dynamics create these multi-geographic realities, that we are not actually of one identity, but of multi-identities. And that relates a lot to how each space in the world is at the same time very local, but very connected on the global scale, and how all these kind of transformations take place. In fact, I will focus on one of the kind of sub-themes of Europan 13, which is how to use new inputs to change urban space. And we had this kind of theme going over. This was in the last forum back in Bratislava. And in fact, what is the role of new inputs when we have large monofunctional areas, when we have this large territorial transformation, and also when we want to open up isolated urban areas. And these are, just go briefly, just for you to get on the specifics of the sites. So for the first category within these large monofunctional areas and what sort of urbanity you can actually inject, we have Bondy in France, and we have Stavanger in Norway, we have Kagram, Vienna in Austria, and we have Schwabisch Gmünd in Germany. And all these are kind of different kind of characteristics. Then, if we look towards territorial transformations, we see another set of sites and another set of projects that you can all feel free to see in the exhibition and in the catalog. It's Trondheim in Norway, it's Vernon in France, Espoo in Finland, Landsberg in Germany, and Molfetta in Italy. And I think here what's a challenge is you have this increasing private development pressures and a threatening and decreasing kind of community role. The last kind of category is how you open up isolated urban areas. And you have Lund in Sweden, Montreuil in France, St. Pölten in Austria, and Santo Tirso in Portugal. And here the challenge was for the competitors how to confront potential overwhelming metropolitan flows when there is this kind of imminent connection to agglomeration, so these new transports that they are coming. So what kind of project, Europan 13 project, as a negotiation apparatus for such kind of sites? Chris talked about another set of sites, in fact, another set of projects before. What we see when we look at the projects of Europan 13 is that they are not anymore kind of one agent kind of project. They are multi-agency approaches, and they are built on these kind of strategies and tactics at the same time that they want to enhance this collaboration, these collective practices that very well explained by Chris Younes. But then, again, they have to look to manage actually this kind of emergence of these collective practices through, in fact, incoming urban dynamics and existing local everydayness. So that's like one set of a kind of challenge. And then the next set of challenge goes to the fact that the projects are not anymore either object-oriented or process-oriented. They have this kind of complex package of interrelationship between this kind of materiality and space and like the agency of space, and how, in fact, the methodology and time play a really considerable role in their projects themselves. So, in fact, having this kind of challenges, then we go to see that negotiation does include participation, but then it's a participation that gradually changes power relations between actors through the practices of learning. And that's kind of revolutionary to believe that learning can change power relationships. And I think that's where Europan is based on, in fact. But then, I mean, there are a lot of critiques on participation. There are some people who say that they have to distribute the power, they have to change urban institutions, and there are others who go in this notion of object and process that they say that we should be aware of these never-ending processes that urban planners usually introduce, but also we should be aware of these authoritarian projects kind of introduced by architects that sometimes they are not aware of their political implications. How to do that? I mean, I just throw you a lot of challenges. This is Honoré de Balzac Paysan. My children, you mustn't go at things head on. You're too weak. Take it from me and take it on an angle. Play dead. Play the sleeping dog. This could be actually Honoré de Balzac advising the Europan 13 project teams. And then we see a very nice concept that I'm borrowing from Keller Easterling. It's this entrepreneurial activism for architecture. And it actually it talks a lot about this notion of change in the architectural practice. So she proposes that this entrepreneur is between the architect and the activist, And in fact, this entrepreneur does something that architects know to do very well, to do this kind of unreasonable inversions, and I will explain later how, to give you some examples. But at the same time, they understand this power of the multiplier and also the promotion. Things that you don't actually learn in architectural schools. But then, when you become this kind of entrepreneur, you have these new ways of introducing change in the cities. And you do that gradually, you do that non-linear way, you do that in a collective manner, tactful, incremental, or in Balzac's kind of advice, on an angle. But for sure, not one-off, and not head-on. I think this is quite crucial. And that serves really well because we are in a world that all these kind of changes take on a very kind of gradual and incremental level. So it's not like one change, it's like a series of continuous changes. And that, I think, becomes very relevant to this kind of practice. So unreasonable inversions in architecture, we see this creating value from degraded environments. I think architects try to do that a lot. Allowing a role to unexpected urban actors. In fact, you end up a project and you have a lot of uninvited actors becoming part of it. Or you create these fuzzy concepts and you allow kind of divergent actors to join in. And that, I think, is kind of really interesting way of starting. So what is the point of departure for the Europan 13 projects in this kind of category? Sometimes they start from the incoming urban dynamics, or they start by kind of revalorizing the existing local everydayness. They use object-oriented approaches, or they actually start from the methodology and time. But then we see that they actually go through the other end of this kind of spectrum that I'm showing you to do that. So it's kind of a really non-linear way of going back and forth. And let's see some projects. And I think what I'm trying to say is this shift in architectural practice is that shift that allows architects to begin to collaborate with other fields in the city. So that's why I think Europan begins, even if it's still overwhelmingly kind of participated by architects, we begin to see this kind of little participation by other disciplines. And I hope that it's going to be kind of increased. So, Vienna, Kagran, we see that in fact, this project, which is departs by building a physical space of the project where the negotiation is going to take place. So it's actually the physical space of the process. And we begin to see that the materiality of the process, it's begin to be discussed a lot. And there is a book called Planning Matters, so how the materiality of things make decisions. This is another project in Bondy, France, where we have these strategies and tactics that in fact are very playful, and they allow this infiltration of public activities and services to get into these very monofunctional big box urbanism territories. So you can see of the images. I mean, these are just to give you reminders when you go through the book, you can look for the projects. But what they do, even if they start this very complex process, they are very much kind of based on the physicality of microspaces, and they use events as kind of a Trojan horse for spatial transformation. Another one in Lund, where it's a runner-up, and they say the existing community should have a say on the future kind of coming of a new transport connection. And in fact, it's a project that takes this kind of existing, which is really unreasonable inversion, as I said before, and tries to revalorize it and give it a critical kind of stance in opposing the urban actors that they relate to this kind of new coming of this really big kind of train station. And then if we go to Montreuil in France, a special mention, we in fact see how there is this approach that we don't even have to do a proposal. We can support what are the actual spatial practices of the site, and in that it can create new collectives. So I think this kind of way becomes really, really important to see that. And then how the physical space and the way it's actually working on site allows this collaboration to take place. Trondheim, Norway. This is a project that starts from like traditional typologies, but at the same time, it talks about rapid transformation, and then through sets of rules and typological innovations, brings inside this kind of new package of architectural practice. And the last one I'm showing is in Vernon in France, where in fact, you see again this kind of power of the multiplier. You have a series of collective piers that they enter into this kind of river. And you also see this tension between a city, which is actually a passage to go to another city next to it, which is a very kind of touristic area, and this which becomes kind of a very important kind of collective every day. What I want to say at the end of the day is that all these kind of projects and all the rest that I haven't shown, in fact, they introduce these multiple negotiation thresholds. So there are all these kind of milestones within the process that every time it increases the sharing between urban actors for co-producing the city. And in fact, this kind of rite of passage through these thresholds, it's what alters the actors' agendas. So I think it's really interesting that you enter a European project with one kind of agenda and you exit with a slightly different one or a completely different one. You also, I think this kind of rite of passage creates new actors, new alliances, new tensions and controversies, new, in fact, spaces that allow this kind of relations. And at the end of the day, I mean, I do believe that the participation that is part of these negotiation processes can gradually change power relationships through process of learning. And Europan, it is one of these kind of institutions that they have this kind of cross-exchange of knowledge. And I think it's very crucial to have that in mind, because I think what is very important and something to really work on is how can we, in a falling apart Europe, create common urban imaginaries. So thank you, and let's allow our agendas to change during the European Forum. Thank you very much.